Hello, everybody. We're waiting a few minutes to allow everybody to join the webinar, and then we're going to kick it off in a few minutes. Thank you. I think we can get started. People will probably join during the webinar, but that's fine. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar called Integrating AI and DevOps for Software Development Teams. My name is Olaf Molenveld. I'm a technology advisor at CircleCI, one of the leading CI/CD platforms in the world. And today I'm very happy to also introduce Tim Kleinloog from Deeploy, one of the veterans in the ML AI space. I think almost working in it for almost 10 years. So Tim, happy to introduce you to our audience. You can do it yourself, of course. So hi.
Hi Olaf, and nice to be here, and thanks for joining you in this CircleCI webinar with Deeploy. Indeed, I've been working in this field for more than 10 years, both for startups and scale-ups, and founded Deeploy about 3.5 years ago, where we really mainly focus on implementing AI in a responsible way. So hope to give you guys some nice insights in where to get started, and yeah, enjoy.
So thank you, Tim. Like I said, really happy to have you here. For everybody joining the webinar, you can ask questions in the Q&A or in the chat, preferably the Q&A, and our beautiful colleagues will basically filter your questions and sort them, and then we can talk about them later on. So first up, the agenda. So we're going to talk about the goal of this webinar. What do we want to achieve with this session? Second, then there's the context. So where are we now in this space? There's a lot of stuff happening. So where are we currently? And then, of course, talking about the main challenges when integrating machine learning / AI. We use these terms interchangeably, but of course, it's a little bit different. But Tim can dive into the details if he wants to. Semantics, maybe or not, we'll see. And then the real meat of this webinar is the do's and don'ts when applying machine learning and AI into your software development and DevOps practices. And then we'll wrap it up with a recap, and we can move into the Q&A, open questions. So starting with the goals of this webinar. I'm talking a little bit from myself, but probably you can relate, or hopefully you can relate. It's really a big hype. Obviously, OpenAI, ChatGPT, the large language models. Everybody's jumping on the AI train, and all the companies are typically asking their teams, their engineers, their people to do something with machine learning and AI. We cannot basically avoid this topic. It's really massive. But then the next question comes up. Yeah, what to do with it, and how and what not to do with machine learning and AI to basically avoid coming in a very risky situation. And of course, there's also a difference between using AI, like Copilot and code generation, test generation, or being a software developer and actually integrating AI in your software development and DevOps practices. So in this webinar, we're going to be focusing mainly or only on I want to use my AI and machine learning into my software development and DevOps practices. I want to leverage these new technologies and possibilities into my work. So that's what we're trying to achieve here, do's and don'ts when applying this AI and machine learning to software development and DevOps in the real world. Because obviously there's a lot of playing around and experimentation and learning. But yeah, how can we get real value out of this new technology, which has great possibilities? So where are we now? AI is taking over the world. I know it's like a hyperbole, but it's kind of true because it's really everywhere and everybody's using it and there's no running away from it, but we are not there yet. And Tim is going to talk a little bit about why we aren't there yet. But Tim?
Yeah. So you probably didn't have missed it, but especially in the last year, generative AI made a big boost. And that was because both the technology made a huge jump, but also because the interface of AI became very user-friendly with ChatGPT. And of course, it is also a way of AI, and we were already doing this for a long time. So actually, the major difference with traditional machine learning is that in traditional machine learning, we were actually training models on our own data, fine-tuning it. And that's, of course, still possible. So you can still train your own models, your own machine learning. But in like one key thing in generative AI is that these models are so big that you actually use it as a foundation model. So you use it as you're not using your own data anymore in the foundation model, maybe only to fine-tune it. And what you see happening is that models are being published now nearly daily or weekly. So you see like new things popping up and on platforms like Hugging Face. And now I'm following a few newsletters, maybe you do too. And like it's every week there are major breakthroughs. So it's super interesting to see what's happening. On the other side, actually training your own large language model is very costly. So it's very hard to compete with these like big commercial model providers and compete with them. But especially maybe you experience that as well in your companies is that, yeah, you cannot get around it. So that like the promise of AI is maybe now in the hype cycle, but it's definitely going to change the way we build software. So it's good to anticipate on it and to know how to apply it in a way that is actually like it actually has value in the real world, as Olaf already said.
Yeah, so Tim, can you maybe give a few examples of real world value that you can achieve by applying machine learning and AI in the real world?
Sure. Yeah. So maybe the most well-known example is recommendation engine. So maybe some of you worked on it, but especially experienced it. So it's mainly used to personalize your experience. So nevertheless, you're looking on Netflix or you're ordering something on Amazon, you are influenced by AI. And that's actually most of the time not even a large language model, but it's actually just more, very smart combination of collecting your data to like show you what is relevant for you. Also very well known is it in advertising, for example, and sometimes very annoying. Also things like marketing automation are already widely used. And what you see with large language models is that there are also big jumps in things like customer support. So that's currently something that's mainly done by humans, but like the role of the human in customer support will drastically change because like the first line of support will probably, it can be much cheaper by just letting the large language model do the support. But the human will still be needed to have a role to make sure that there are no weird answers in there. But like the whole decision support can be done by large language models. And decision support in general will also improve. So the like AI, at least how I see it, is that AI will be like a super assistant for the human so that you can do your job a lot more efficient. So especially in more back office applications. So for example, transaction monitoring in finance, like not humans will do this anymore. So an algorithm will detect it, but the human eventually is responsible. So, but become a superhuman together with AI.
Maybe I can ask a question. You see my gray hair, or maybe you don't see it on, on the video, but if I kind of look at recommendation engine or marketing automation churn triggers, what's kind of the difference between like how we did it in the old days, if this, then that kind of like decision tree versus a model running this?
Yeah, so from a user perspective, the difference doesn't have to be that different, but yeah, the possibilities, especially to mimic a human in the AI, that made a big change. So like the large language model can actually better mimic us. So traditional machine learning was already better in making some decisions because it could just process a lot more data. But with large language models, actually the way that the AI can express itself, so the interface towards the human is text, and that's very natural to us. So and very powerful.
Okay, so it's really in the interaction where it's the difference. Where if you have like an if this then that kind of tree, you already have a very rigid interface how to kind of interact with the system, and now it becomes more fluid or human-like. Is that kind of?
Yeah, and it also, of course, introduces new risks. So sometimes it's hard to make see the difference between the AI and the human, but the AI still makes a lot of mistakes. So especially we should make sure that it sticks to our ethical standards and that it doesn't like hallucinate and go to do all kind of weird stuff. Um, and yeah, there are also, of course, the increased dangers. So also a lot of people became aware of these dangers now because it actually the AI is so good.
Yeah, and we will of course talk more about these do's and don'ts. One last thing here, I hear a lot about LLMs, large language models, but I also hear things like NLP.
Yeah,
What's kind of the difference there?
and not much. So actually, the large language model is NLP. Only the large is added. So it's actually they already like years ago they predicted that if they would keep training that the model would become better. And actually, that's what they did, and it became actually better. So there are now still some predictions that the performance will increase, and they just will like throw more compute on it, and probably you will see that it will increase the performance again. And actually, you will also see the terminology change. So large language models, yeah. So the discussion is what is large? So what is the L in LLM? So you will see that the terminology will change to foundation model. So it's the foundation model, and then we will see specializations on top of it. So like domain specific specializations.
Okay, so there's basically different scales happening here.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the challenges, very high level here. So we have plenty of time to dive into the details. So the challenges basically are not, I think, very different from any kind of new hype happening, but maybe this one is different because it's really, people are talking about Cambrian explosions. I feel this is really a Cambrian explosion because there's like these landscapes popping up, like the ML AI landscapes that are like already like so huge with tooling and categories. Like even it looks like this domain has been existing for 50 years already, and there's so many to kind of parse what is Hugging Face, what are these tools already. So like navigating through this space, I think is a big challenge, especially because I believe tooling will probably consolidate at some point, and trying to figure out what to use, what the value is of what kind of tooling. I think is a huge challenge here. Another thing that we have been discussing is like experimenting, playing around with it, learning versus applying it in the real world, getting real value out of it, finding a business case where the AI is basically a tool instead of a goal. I think that's also very challenging. of course, CircleCI is a CI/CD tool. Automation versus manual, what to automate, what not, and why. That's also, an interesting challenge to decide up front what to do and why, because it basically takes experience, like Tim has, like for almost 10 years. You need to understand where you want to end up and what the challenges are when you are in production, so you can kind of decide what to automate and what to leave to humans. Collaboration, because it's not only a technical challenge, it has to do with compliancy, security, risk, privacy, all these things, sourcing the data, making sure the quality of the data is correct, data science, and software engineers. Basically, you cannot avoid working together in this space. And security and compliancy, obviously, I think it's called the AI Act. Is that right, Tim? Which is like a new law?
Yeah. In Europe, we're world champions making regulations. So the EU AI Act will be one of the is actually the first AI regulation that's coming up. So you will see that the risks of the AI are also taken serious. So it's good to anticipate on it already.
Yeah. So these things will change, and they will kind of move fast, and you need to keep a close eye on it.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah. And then the last challenge, of course, there's more challenges, but it's like the tension between commercial models, and which are closed source models, the large language models that the OpenAI, etc., are running, and then open source models that you can basically, you need to check, of course, the license types, etc., but then you can apply them and control more. There's a big tension between those two. And focus seems to be a lot on the commercial models because they have the visibility, but there's also a lot of stuff happening in the open source model world, which might be very valuable. So now we're basically getting into the do's and don'ts of this space, which we feel is the important stuff, because this has to do with experience. And this is why I'm happy that Tim is here, because basically, Tim, you probably have encountered lots of risky or challenging or really crashing and burning and flames coming out of this thing.
Yeah. Certainly. So I think it's good to at least maybe prevent you from starting over again in like building your real world application. So we want to give you some practical do's and don'ts when you indeed get started with building stuff. So hopefully we can prevent some errors that I definitely made in the past, or the dangerous situations that I saw.
Yeah. So okay, let's dive in. Before starting, that's the first stage, of course. And basically, what we're trying to do is we have these opposites like don't and do, which should be like the opposites of each other. And Tim is going to kind of dive in a little bit with more detail. So, like I said, AI is a tool, it's a means to an end. It should not be the goal. Like, we're going to use AI, we don't know what to do with it. You really should have a solid business case with a clear goal on why you want to apply AI or machine learning for your application or for your platform or product. And Tim, maybe you can explain why this is important, because it has to do with assumptions.
Maybe this is indeed not something that you want to hear as a technical person with a cool new technology where you want to get started on, but yeah, definitely I saw this so many times. AI is never the goal. So the beautiful thing about AI is that it actually can have a huge business impact. But if you don't think about it before you start building, it's doomed to fail. So it's super important that that you know what you're building it for, and that and that also relates to the second point, that you don't only see it as a technical challenge. So of course you can there can be very challenging technologies that you can use, but still, like if you build something that may be too complex for a business user to use or for a compliance team to approve, it is very yeah, you will have very disappointing experiences. So it didn't really change that much from the traditional machine learning. So really start with knowing the goal and having a business case involving the right people.
Maybe I can ask a question here. Like when I read up on like collaboration between for machine learning and AI, it's typically like software developers need to work with data scientists. But if I hear you correctly, it's much broader than this. It's not only data scientists, but it's also compliancy, security, risk. What
Yeah,
kind
it's
of
actually,
teams or departments do you typically need to kind of collect together
yeah.
before you even start?
Yeah, so this is also maybe even more complex than in like traditional software development. So in software development is like the whole way of working is already much more mature. So if you look at a tool as CircleCI, it already has a lot of features to involve to have like all the checks and balances in place. And in the AI world, this is still a lot more immature. And actually the stakeholders are yeah, there are a lot more stakeholders that you have to account for, especially things like compliancy has a very important role because you will be processing a lot of sensitive data probably. You will make decisions for users which may impact them. So it is very important to yeah to really know what the impact is and don't assess it yourself as a technical developer, but also make sure that the right people are involved to make sure that you don't have any blockers along the way. And that's what I see a lot of times. So then you saw like beautiful software, beautiful technology, and then still it dies because yeah, people didn't account for any blockers along the road.
Yeah, that's a pity. Basically, you write the software, it works, it runs, and then at some point somebody comes along and says like, do we actually know why the data is being used to train this model on, or
Yeah.
why it's kind of giving me these results? What do you typically see happening as a crash and burn scenario?
Yeah, so it can have multiple reasons, but it's good to be in control at the beginning, so not at the end. So I once heard like a developer tell me, yeah, my laptop is actually the biggest graveyards of models because it just all dies on my laptop and it never gets into production. And that's probably, as an engineer, that's the last thing that you want.
It's like works on my machine, but then a little bit different.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, when we talked about this and we created these slides in this webinar, it became like my parallel is like it's like a dashboard. You need to design your dashboard up front, like what graphs, what time windows, what kind of correlations, what kind of views do you want to show, and this drives basically how your data should be collected, how it should be indexed, how it should be kind of structured. So you basically work backwards. You work from the outcome, and then you work backwards, and that basically decides what kind of database you use, what kind of data structures, what kind of licenses you can apply. That kind of
I think that's a good parallel indeed. So yeah, you should be sure make sure that what you're building is actually what yeah, what is also expected by the yeah, by the users eventually. And so that like the parallel with the dashboard is quite accurate.
yeah, design first.
Exactly.
Okay, I think this one, the data is probably the most crucial thing, and you can probably explain why this is, but that's my takeaway from my journey into learning about these things. If the data is crap, then the outcome will be crap. But yeah, the first do and don't is like skip the data groundwork. So don't skip the data groundwork, but make sure that you have the right quality of data. So and the right data filtered on specific things or not. So how can you kind of make sure that you know that the data is correct?
Yeah. Yeah, good question. So this is quite a difference between the whole foundation model and large language model world and traditional machine learning. So in traditional machine learning, you always started with the data and making sure that your data was high quality, that it was complete. that there was no personal data involved. And with large language models, you're not completely in control anymore because you have to trust that OpenAI used the right data, but they don't have any openness on it. So it's sometimes hard, but you still see that also with some open source models, for example, Phi, which is the Microsoft model that is released recently, they, for example, trained only on study books, so have very high quality data. And it is actually the foundation. So you should be able, yeah, you should be understanding actually what data has been used in order to produce high quality output. Because yeah, garbage in is garbage out. That's just true. And that also comes for, yeah, you cannot expect any magic if the data is not correct. So especially in your own companies, if you start fine-tuning on specific data, you cannot, if you don't have the data in the first place, you cannot expect that the model will magically have that knowledge.
Are you talking about like correlations, that it kind of distills meaning from random data that you put in?
Yeah, so eventually all these models are statistics. So it will of course learn from data, but if the correlations or in the original data are bullshit, then yeah, there will also be like the conclusions will be wrong in the end. And
is that what they call what they call dreaming or hallucinating, or?
yeah, no, hallucinating could have also different reasons. So it's still hard to understand why, especially these bigger models do that. But yeah, eventually, if you just throw a model at all the data that's out there, then yeah, eventually it could be a strategy just to trust that the model picks out like makes its own conclusions, which data is reliable, which data is not reliable. But if you think about like a future where AI actually also will generate data, which could also be wrong, then and you keep trading on data that is wrong, then eventually that's a sort of doom scenario. So that actually proves that data is always the foundation. And if the data is not correct, and much of the data is actually produced by us and collected by us and cleaned by us, yeah, then the models will not perform. So it's really the foundation.
Yeah. So making sure you have the right quality of data, even in the smallest models that you like, open source models that you train yourself internally, is crucial to get the right outcomes.
Exactly. So never skip it and make sure that you stay in control of it, save it, reuse it. It's still very, very powerful to have good data. And in the past, they said it's like the new gold. I think it's also the old gold. So it's still super valuable to have the right data. It's and actually there's also paid a lot of, so maybe that's a bit of a something that a lot of people don't see, but actually making high quality data is also a very high cost in producing data. So also, for example, annotating data and making sure that there is high quality data also is a big amount of the costs that go into making reliable models and making good models.
Yeah. So basically, the automation with machine learning AI requires manual work up front to kind of work up the data into the right
Yeah.
quality.
Yeah. So without this, also that, yeah, I think it was on one of the previous slides when we said it's very costly to train your own large language models. That's also partly because of collecting and making sure that there's the right data. And it's also why the commercial model providers are not very open with their data because it's really valuable to them.
Yeah. That's where basically the hours, the work goes in.
Exactly.
Right. And then, of course, you also need to like store, almost like a Git repo, your versions of your data, your training data, your validation data, and your models, I assume. This is also where things like Hugging Face come in, I guess.
Yeah. So Hugging Face is very cool. So indeed, if you are looking for some open source data, then that's certainly the place to explore. And eventually, that's again more from also governance reasons. It's very good to think about, hey, how can I track back the version of the model that I'm using in production back to the data that went into it? So that would be, yeah, if you cannot do that, then yeah, there is a risk involved, of course. And it's very powerful if you could, the same as with code, track back to which version of your data was used to train it, to fine-tune it, so that you also can prove that actually, yeah, there was no confidential data in it or any data with personal data.
Yeah, like audit logging.
Exactly, yeah. So if you ever get audited, then eventually the data is probably very important. Also, in case your model contains any bias, then it could be that actually the original bias was already in your data. So yeah, then you can track it back.
Yeah, you can validate why it produced these results. Yeah. Okay, models. The
The magic.
models. Yeah, it's a Kraftwerk number track. I like. So don't use ChatGPT for everything, but select and train a model that fits your purpose.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so of course it's not a problem to use ChatGPT. It's powerful. You can use some nice proof of concepts for it, but because we're talking about the real world, yeah, we want to prevent you all building very cool stuff on ChatGPT, and then like eventually, yeah, it's actually not feasible in the real world. So OpenAI is, of course, a very commercial model provider. So in some cases, which are low risk, it's completely fine to use it, but not for all use cases. So really think, and that's also going back before you start, that you select a model that actually fits your purpose. So if like the task at hand is very simple, there's absolutely no need to use a very big large language model. So there could be like a simple regression model that could already and do the job, and that will save you a lot of compute, a lot of complexity, and a lot of headaches at the end.
Where can you find those models? I mean, how can you, as a software developer, or how do you figure out what there is out there and what to use?
Yeah, so of course, this world didn't start yesterday, so there's a lot out there. Maybe the resources are a bit different than in traditional software engineering. So some of the things are maybe on GitHub, but especially on Hugging Face, you see like a whole world opening on examples that are out there. Also, like the newest models, there are things that you can that you can use as tutorials. A lot of the data scientists also are active on platforms like Kaggle, where you can do competitions to train your own models. Um, and maybe some of you also work together with data science teams in your company. So then like the model training or yeah, talk to your colleagues and learn from them, of course.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the places section, I think it's called places in Hugging Face, is also very interesting to see all kinds of projects, and you can look at the files, how they basically run these models.
Yeah. Yeah, so actually Hugging Face is, yeah, as they put it themselves, are actually the new GitHub for machine learning. So it's actually, if you dig a bit into it, you can actually see all the code that is being used. So you can learn, of course, a lot from it. But yeah, again, don't start too complicated again. So really make sure that you also understand the basic models.
Yeah. And we're talking about black box models and explainability. I think that's also one of the core pillars of Deeploy, of the tool.
Yeah. Yeah, so so especially, yeah, so I don't have to explain that commercial models are black box, so there's not a lot of information that you can get out of it. But like models that you train yourself or open source models, you really have the chance to make them transparent. And if we refer back again to regulation, then what you will see if like applications are more high risk, so you want to build a tool that diagnoses in healthcare, for example, or you're doing a loan application review. Yeah, I don't have to explain that that's high risk and that people can get like feel consequences of that. And yeah, like most of the countries will never accept that the models will be completely black box. So it is good to already start thinking about how do I make my models transparent to not only build trust in the whole organization, but even it could be a consequence of it could be a reason to block your application completely, that is not that you will not be able to understand why the model produced certain output. And especially for non-technical users, then there's really a trust problem. So not only like during model training, this is important, but also in production. So that you still can understand, that you can still can explain why certain things happened. And that don't people have to come to you all the time, that you have to explain them how the actually the output was produced.
So basically, like making this very simple for myself, if I have like outcomes of a machine learning model that I need to explain to regulation or to my customers by law or by basically how my company operates, I cannot use a commercial model anyway. Is that right? Or
It seems like it, yeah. So at least in Europe, the legislation is quite clear about this. So they it's actually transparency is a requirement that is out there. So there it is, of course, a discussion, because also there are lobbies, there are model providers like Mistral in Europe that they actually chose for the open source approach. So they have the possibility to make it actually transparent how the model works. But you will see that this is also a field that is developing fast in the coming years, also because of the regulation that requires this and the models that cannot deliver on it. So it could be at this point in time, if I would take it seriously, I would first start experimenting with maybe commercial models, and if it becomes important for you, really take this seriously. So maybe cut on be happy with maybe a performance that's a bit less, but where you can provide the transparency that is needed.
yeah, that's a good one. Last topic in this slide is automate everything versus embedding manual validation steps. Of course, as a CI/CD provider, we're in the world of automation. We say, okay, you can create pipelines, but we also see, like, when machine learning and AI happens, you typically need manual human steps in the loop, which you can do with CircleCI happily. But you need these steps in there. Why is that?
Yeah, so it's automation is certainly important because it will prevent errors, the same as in software engineering. But it is harder to validate domain knowledge in an automated test. So of course there's still a need for technical tests. You can maybe even test on some specific metrics that are important for machine learning. But it also relates to that, like the multidisciplinary approach that is needed here. So it's very likely that also a compliance person has to do a sign off on like a new model deployment. So yeah, automate till the way that you actually can, but also make sure that you also leave room for some creativity, some manual review, some checks, and it really depends on your use case, of course. So I can also imagine that there are use cases that you can do, like automated retraining and stuff, but not all the time. So
Yeah,
don't like take automation for granted.
no, just like you said, domain knowledge. The human domain knowledge is crucial in making sure that the validation is correct. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Then monitoring metrics, the last slide of the do's and don'ts. And then we're kind of moving towards closing up and moving into the Q&A. Don't think about metrics afterwards. Basically, the dashboard analogy, I guess, and define your golden metrics up front. Assume things never change versus stay in control of change and the risk. And then there's model drift. Maybe you can kind of talk a few minutes about this.
Yeah, I think Olaf, you already mentioned the golden metric in the beginning, so it's certainly something to think of upfront, and then also really monitor this. So it could be a reason if your golden metric drops that you have to retrain, and retraining can of course then could be a manual step, could be an automated step, but at least don't think about it afterwards, because it is in the core of your application. And Actually, interesting thing to give you guys think about after the webinar is also, yeah, can you even say that like models are stable software? So it's so due to change. So um, a model is like a snapshot in time where you have seen like a certain snapshot of reality, and of course like the context keeps changing. So that means that if you just assume that things not change, that you will be at risk. So you have to monitor that. You have to make your updates in time because there are things like model drift. So that means that the model will drift from reality because reality will continue to develop, and then the model didn't capture these new things. So it
Does
is
this
important.
mean that the thing you cannot keep it up and running? Like, okay, now it's stable, it's released version whatever GA 1.0, and
Yeah.
just keep it running for 5 years? That's not the
No,
case
no,
here.
it's certainly not. So, of course, if you use things like the commercial models, they will update it for you, but then you don't know what they updated. So that's also, again, a risk. Um, but definitely it's not stable software. So actually, if you keep it running and you think, hey, it still technically works, that can still mean that yeah, that is actually making very unreliable predictions. So it's certainly something to not only focus on technical bugs, but you just like the domain knowledge, as we said, that's super important to keep an eye on these metrics and act on it.
Yeah, this might be also a nice bridge into what CircleCI brings to the table and what Deeploy brings to the table. And let me talk a little bit about this. So basically, we talked about automation versus manual steps, and CircleCI is an automation platform. We originated with CI/CD in mind, but of course, adding models and machine learning and AI to the equation is just as workable for us. And in this picture, you can see like typically you would have all these manual steps when developing machine learning or AI applications: the building, the training, the testing, the packaging, deployment, retraining. You can automate all these things in the CD pipeline using CircleCI. And then you can add these manual gates also in there, which we support, where a human can be added to the loop and check for things or approve or deny or look at the results of a test run. And the beautiful thing is that all these things can also be run in parallel. We have GPUs that we can spin up for you for testing in parallel, etc. So the cool thing is that you can combine automation with manual intervention, and we can have like the external webhooks, external triggers that we can fire off on. So if you're in Hugging Face or whatever, the model changes, you can fire off automatically a validation pipeline, for example, that makes sure that the results are still within the range that you deem acceptable. And then you can have an engineer look at it and say, okay, this looks good, press the button, and then the thing will deploy again, or it will retrain itself if needed. So I think that's the next step in CI/CD pipelines, where you kind of start combining external triggers, where models change, where test data changes, where training data changes, and you kind of integrate this with manual intervention and validation. And Deploy, what can Deploy offer?
Yeah, so actually Deeploy started from the idea that transparency is super important to build trust. So the basis is still Git and CI/CD platforms like CircleCI, so where you like that's the basis of everything that you build. So you need to make sure that your code is versioned, that you have automation in place. But what Deeploy tries to do is, especially on the production workloads of AI, to make sure that they are explainable so that you can add a transparency layer on top of your applications. And we start from the point that you actually, so it is, for example, possible to deploy your application from CircleCI to the environment of Deeploy, where we will make sure that all the things that are needed, for example, by regulation, are arranged. So there's features around governance, about monitoring, and things that will help you to detect drift. And yeah, we try to be a very open platform. So we try to integrate with all the the technology that's out there, which you already may be using or considering using, so that you can really plug and play in the ecosystem.
So it's more than an ML ops tool. It's
Exactly,
also
yeah. So we really see that the risks of AI are yeah, we saw them already way up front, but you see that now more and more people are having some worries about how they can do this reliably and in a responsible way. So actually we call our platform a responsible AI platform.
cool. CircleCI of course has a free tier. You can use it for free. You can have a trial tier, etc. That's all can be found on our website, CircleCI.com. I assume Deeploy also has trials or free tiers.
Yeah. So I invite you guys all to go to our website, deeploy.ml, and sign up for a free community account and give it a try, I would say. And happy to hear your feedback.
That's awesome. So a recap, maybe in a very condensed way, you can recap basically what we talked about in the 46 minutes that we are in the webinar, and then we can move to the QA.
Yep. So maybe a small recap. So won't repeat all our discussion, but make sure again, start with your solid business case. AI is a tool, not the goal. Although maybe from an engineering point of view, yeah, play with it. But once you get serious, do this. Garbage in is garbage out. So quality data is essential. Don't skip it. Select the right model for your purpose. So make sure to really understand the goal of the model. And in case it's super simple, actually the task at hand, don't use very complicated technology. It's not needed. Things will change, be prepared. So use things like automation, but also smart detection, and involve your stakeholders to make the right decisions and collaborate. So it's not a technical effort. It's really a collaboration with maybe very high like maybe even C-level involved sometimes that is really worried about some of these things. So take that seriously.
That's awesome. Thank you, Tim. Like I said, CircleCI.com, we have all kinds of tutorials. We have a free course now. Deeploy has their free tiers and trials that you can work with. Go to our website and play around with it. And hopefully this has been an interesting webinar. Thank you very much. And now we're going to move into the Q&A. Starting with Dima. Dima is asking, are the developers' jobs in danger? For decades, I hear the same story. UML tools will generate all code. Visual Studio will generate all code. Will AI generate all codes?
Yeah, it's a valid concern, but I don't think you should worry. I think your job will be more interesting. So as I think we touched upon shortly, without humans, there will be complete garbage in the end. So AI really needs us to code and learn from it. So I see that AI will always have a role of maybe doing like the big bunch of the work, but you are still needed with real knowledge to fine tune, to improve the code and have a review role. But of course, use it to be more productive.
It's like you said, domain knowledge is still crucial to validate the results and make
Exactly.
sure that
I think
there's no garbage coming out.
yeah. So I see a future where you maybe have to work a little less hard, but be very concentrated when you work.
Yeah, and I think I was talking to a person from a code generation company, and they also said like, okay, you need to apply automation also when you generate code because you need to make sure that the checks are there for security, privacy, compliancy. That's typically stuff that you can automate in your pipeline. And then, of course, like you say, the domain knowledge is also crucial. So to keep the human in the loop to make sure that there's no crap flowing out of this. So I think, Dima, we're good. We're still valuable here as humans. And also what Tim said, like the data up front needs to be worked up into the right quality, which is also where humans come into play. Iki Muchaneta, I hope I pronounced it correctly. I've never worked with AI, so this may be a dumb question. No, they're not dumb questions at all. Are there any AI plugins that we can use for specific examples? For example, Google Maps plugins. Maybe there are AI plugins that one can choose. Recommendation AI used in Netflix. Could be used for restaurants as well. Any ideas where I can find these AI plugins? I think that's the Hugging Face thing, like we discussed.
Yeah, I think two things. So indeed, if it's quite just low risks, I think some of the examples here that you mentioned are kind of low risk. What is interesting to look at for these low risk applications that actually OpenAI is having also a whole marketplace where you can actually plug into the knowledge of the commercial provider that OpenAI is, but still, yeah, you see that a lot of companies are making like sort of apps around it and like publish it on like the app store of OpenAI. That's an interesting place to look if you're looking for specific things. But if you are looking more in the open source world where you just want to use stuff that maybe other developers already created, that's I think a good place to start. So you can dive into it and you can also adjust it. So that's of course not possible with the OpenAI marketplace.
Okay, cool. Next question is from Aaron Banyach, I think. How to know if we need LLM or just a simple regression model? Yeah, that's a good one. That's also something that pops up in my head all the time.
Yeah, and that's a good question. It's I think what you could always do is just benchmark it against each other. So and even before doing that, yeah, make sure that you have your golden metric, right? So when are you satisfied with the results? So maybe like the large language model does produce a better output, but may only be slightly better. So if you do your experiment and have like a very simple model and benchmark it with a very large, complicated model. Also, if the large language model even produces a slightly better output, then maybe you would also be satisfied with the slightly less good output from the simple model, but it's good enough. So it's always just only do this kind of benchmarking if you already defined where you are satisfied with before. And
it's like lean, basically, first figuring out what is good enough.
Yeah. So there's not one right answer, of course, but the benchmarking is of course is important, and not only having like you have your golden metrics, but also take into account the requirements from your other stakeholders. So maybe your golden metric will be better, but then you violate all kind of other requirements.
Yeah, it's a trade-off.
Yeah, it's a trade-off.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So basically what you're saying, define your metrics up front so you know what kind of range or benchmark you need to target at. And then you can kind of compare A/B tests.
And compare. Yeah, then you know for sure.
Yeah.
Design a good experiment, compare, and select the one that is best based on all the requirements that you have. So even cost could be a requirement, right? So then if the costs are 10 times as high with a very complicated model, then go for that's already simple reasoning to go for a simpler model.
Yeah, that makes sense. Another question from Aaron. Besides prototyping with ChatGPT, what will be an easy practical setup, easy between quotes, to start with? For example, AWS SageMaker with a model from Hugging Face is something to be considered, or is that already too complex to start? That's a good one.
Good question. Yeah. So I think it's a sort of extension of the previous question. So I would start with indeed again, what are you optimizing for? Design indeed an experiment. So it could also be just do the OpenAI with the AWS SageMaker example, and then that's like very easy to start indeed. So I think indeed AWS can also run these Hugging Face examples. So then at least you also know that you have a sort of transparent alternative that you can use. What also is that we use quite often also to experiment is like the Google Colab notebooks. So they also support some GPUs. So if you want to run some more complicated models and code in it, start in like a Google Colab notebook and just throw in some load in some models from Hugging Face and try to run them there. That's like needed in case you already run heavier models than that you can run on your local machine. So local machine is also fine to start with, of course.
Yeah, cool. I'm going to skip a few questions, and I think this is an interesting one from Mehdi Pasha. What programming languages or tools should we learn to start with AI and ML? Of course, Python is king, it seems.
Yeah, yeah. It's maybe not all software engineers would like to hear this, but the Python is, I think, the language to go to for machine learning. So you see that frameworks like PyTorch, which are very influential, are all written in Python. So even if you want to make very detailed contributions to these kind of frameworks, or if you apply it, like the most of these libraries are available in Python. And I
Cool.
think in the modern microservice infrastructures that doesn't really matter. So that you have your machine learning service in Python.
Yeah, and what you I think also see is that basically you can even generate like APIs on top of your models that you can basically talk to with type,
Yep.
script, Go, whatever language you prefer. So
Yep.
then the model becomes a black box, even though it might be an open source model that you trained yourself, but then the API interface is the way to kind of leverage or use it, right?
Yeah, the only exception is maybe if you're interested in like the very low level detailed runtimes, for example, then I think C++, for example, is the most efficient languages that are being used, or sometimes even new languages are developed, for example, by Google specifically for model development. So it's interesting to keep an eye on indeed what's happening there.
Yeah. So Python, if you want to really like get it tinkering with models and training and all the logic around it, and then
Yeah.
an API you can talk to with any language. And if you really want to deep dive, C++.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you're interested in the low level, very high performance stuff, then that's the way to go.
David Busaka is asking, are available any CircleCI CD examples for machine learning projects? Yeah, we have a lot of information on our blogs and tutorials and documentation. Like I said, we just yesterday released a free course about applying CI/CD with machine learning. Yeah, this stuff is all available on our website, and probably if you reach out directly to any of our colleagues or to our info@circleci.com, we can also point you in the right direction if you cannot find it. So there's a lot of stuff popping up and happening. There's also, we have some open source repositories now for machine learning resources. So yeah, that information will probably, or I assume, be collected on our website in the docs and in the blogs. And I assume for Deeploy it's the same.
Exactly. Yeah. So we are active on GitLab. So yeah, shoot me a message or explore the Deeploy machine learning libraries, and yeah, you can even run them probably on CircleCI. So a nice challenge for you.
Okay, we're running out of time. It's 1 hour now, so I thank you all for your great questions, for your attendance. Thank you for joining this webinar. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Olaf.
And hopefully see you all in our next webinar, because there will be coming more webinars in this series. So thank you all and have a great day.
Thanks all.